The ancient witness today is from Matthew 14:22 through 33. Jesus insisted that the disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side. Having sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, remaining there alone as night fell. Meanwhile, the boat, already 1,000 yards from shore, was being tortured by the waves, which had been raised by the fierce winds. At about 3 a.m, Jesus came walking toward them on the lake. And when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the water, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and in their fear they began to cry out. Jesus hastened to reassure them. "Don't worry, it is I. Don't be afraid." Peter spoke up and said, "If it is really you, tell me to come to you across the water." "Come," Jesus said. So Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened. He began to sink and cried out, "Save me!" Jesus immediately stretched out his hand and caught Peter. "You have so little faith," Jesus said to him. "Why did you doubt?" Once the two had climbed into the boat, the wind had died down, and those who were in the boat showed great reverence, declaring to Jesus, "You are indeed God's own."
Thank you, Susan. Today, I want to tell you the story of Rebecca Simonich and the story about how one person reached out to another in a time of need. It begins with Rebecca. When she was 15 years old, she started having periods of brief seizures that affected her speech. And when she was diagnosed with epilepsy, she tried medication after medication, but nothing was able to stop the seizures. So at the age of 20, she flew to Baltimore to meet with a neurologist. And the doctor there told her that brain surgery could help, that if she went through with it, the surgeons could remove the scarred tissue, the scarred brain tissue that was causing her symptoms. And as she boarded the 1-hour flight back home, she kept replaying what the doctor had said in her mind. And like almost anyone who receives big news, Rebecca remembers only absorbing about 10 to 15% of that conversation that she had with the doctor. So it's no surprise that she had a tremendous amount of anxiety because she wasn't able to remember the details of what was said. And needless to say, she had a tremendous amount of questions. All she could do when she boarded the plane was to stare out the window, sort of a lost blank stare, feeling so overwhelmed by the emotions of the moment. And it's a common feeling that I think we all have experienced at some point in time. The feeling we get when something pops up, seemingly out of the blue, taking us by surprise. That feeling of being overwhelmed, almost like a literal weight pressing down upon us. And having so much gravity that it weighs us down. So much so that we have trouble focusing, remembering, and thinking clearly. We want to have some sort of control, but all we have instead is uncertainty about what our new reality will entail. And I don't know about you, but it sometimes seems to me like it's layered in approach, like it's one on top of the other. I mean, it's one thing when it happens to us as individuals, but it's another thing, though, when it happens on a much broader scale. How sometimes big news, or storm, if you will, happens on a systemic level or comes down from above, compounding the weight of uncertainty. Like, say, after 8 years of fighting in Iraq and 20 years of fighting in Afghanistan, we were supposed to be done with forever wars. Instead, our leadership decided to just, on a whim, it seems, to go to war with Iran. And the thing about that is, I don't remember anyone asking for that. In fact, I think leadership was quite clear that that was the last thing that would be happening right now. Of all the things, that would be the last. And now the entire world is feeling the effects of the tidal wave that has moved through the global energy markets, through the supply chains, causing not just pains at the pump, but pains at the grocery store as well. And after 5 months of airstrikes, blockades, and failed agreements, there is still no end in sight. And yet the weight keeps pressing down, compounding the effects of poverty, exhaustion, racism, and burnout. But that is empire's playbook, imagining they can control the water. I say all that to say that embodied life can be overwhelming at times, making it hard to plan for what lies ahead, and reminding us of just how vulnerable we are as individuals and as a community. In the ancient witness for today, we get a glimpse of vulnerable disciples in the midst of turmoil. They've been sent into waters they cannot control, and they're feeling overwhelmed in the moment. Jesus isn't anywhere that these fishermen, these experienced sailors, can see. And now the ceaseless motion of the waves is beating the boat so hard that it is literally coming apart at the seams. And just before the gospel for today, we learn that John the Baptist had been killed at the hands of the king of Judea. Murdered, in fact, for his relentless truth-telling, his speaking out. And when Jesus got the news about John's death, he and the disciples withdrew across the lake to escape the wrath of King Herod. Once there, seemingly safe and beyond Herod's reach, they were met with a crowd of people. And seeing that these vulnerable, ordinary people were hurt, poor, broke, and hungry, Jesus and the disciples choose to meet that moment, with food and healing and collective companionship. And that is the backdrop for today's gospel. They're trying to lay low. They've just fed thousands of people, and now Jesus is sending these disciples back across the lake, right back to where they fled from. What a whirlwind the disciples must have been feeling. Surely they must have been wondering about their fate. would it be like John's? Surely Herod would come after Jesus now. What about his fate? And what about the work? They're too valuable in the ministry of extending God's presence in the world. Surely on this night, as the boat rises and crashes in the waves, they are thinking about all the possibilities for things to go wrong. And the boat, probably no bigger than a living room, is tossed about this way and that, shaken up all through the night. And the thing I can't get past is that they're only in this mess because Jesus insisted they get into the boat. And now they're at the mercy of the forces that conspire against them. Not just the immediate storm, but the political one too. They're in this boat together. They didn't ask for it or volunteer for it. They just responded to the invitation to follow Jesus, to go with him, not with a promise that they'd be safe from all harm, but he did promise that they would be extending God's presence in the world. Now, in the ancient world, the sea was the embodiment of chaos. It was the place where demons and gods worked out their vengeance and their wrath. So it makes sense that when the storm comes, it's big enough to quite literally torment the boat. So much so that Peter thinks he sees a ghost. But it's not a ghost, and it's not Herod's goons coming for them. It's Jesus. And in Peter's excitement, Peter attempts to do the impossible, to do something only gods could do and emperors claim to be able to do, and that is control the chaos of the sea. But only God can do that. Only God can part the waters that can lead an entire people to the promised land of freedom. Only God can create order from chaos and something from nothing and a way out of no way. So, here's the crux of the story. It's a thing that's really easy to miss. I missed it myself. The same Jesus who reaches out his hand to save Peter from sinking, that Jesus, the one God calls God's very own after being baptized in the Jordan, that Jesus is the very same Jesus that sent Peter and the disciples into the boat in the first place. We tend to lose sight of that at times, being 1,000 miles away from where we started, particularly when we're neck deep in something we never chose. But our lives, so often beset by hardship, so often vulnerable, more often than not, leave us feeling as though we cannot keep our heads above the water. And in that troubled water, it helps to get that helping hand. Beloveds, faith is not about doing the impossible. Only gods can walk on water. But more of trusting that the voice of God is still accessible when our community is faced with the impossible. In other words, God does not call us to walk on water, but God does ask us to trust the presence of God to help us discern, to help us find courage, and to guide us along the way of extending God's love into the world. So, what happened to Rebecca, you might be asking? Well, Rebecca found a helping hand of her own. Shortly after her flight took off, she made eye contact with the gentleman sitting beside her. As the conversation started, he asked her what brought her to Baltimore. And still in shock from the news, she quietly said out loud for the first time that she just found out she would have to have brain surgery. And at that very moment, her neighbor turned to her to share that he happened to be a neuropsychologist and that he had worked with patients just like Rebecca. He asked her questions and listened to her responses, scoping out her level of uncertainty and what she had learned during her visit at the hospital. And then he calmly began to clarify what all those statements the doctor said, what they meant, helping to ease the anxiety Rebecca felt. He even went so far as to draw pictures of the brain and how each part functioned, and show her graphically where the inflamed tissue was and how the surgery would remove the scarred parts. And now Rebecca refers to that experience as having received the gift of this wonderful stranger who had so much compassion and so much expertise. Well, she went ahead with the surgery, and now she works in the field of healthcare. And she's able to offer a helping hand of her own and giving back to so many who find themselves in a similar position. Thanks be to God.